and hopefully leave you with some hope before the hour is up. And what I would encourage you to do is, if you have a question as I'm speaking, just word it out or raise your hand or whatever. This can be more of a dialogue than just me sort of talking at you. So I'd appreciate questions if you have them. And certainly we'll have, I'll save time for questions at the end. So the depressing fact, one of the depressing facts, is that the United States leads the world in incarceration. We are the largest incarcerator in the world. Not only in overall numbers, but also in terms of the percentage of folks that we lock up. That means, for that dubious distinction, we've beaten out China, Russia, the countries where you would think might be ahead of us. We beat them out on it. We lock up today in prisons and jails across this country 2.4 million people. 2.4 million people. And the population of folks who are locked up has grown about 380% since the late 70s. So it's been an explosion in the prison and jail population. So I'm talking nationally when I give you that figure. Let's just focus on Ohio for a minute. And let's use Martin Luther King's life as an example, milestones in his life as an example of how the prison population has grown. Dr. King was born in 1929, at which time we had about 8,800 people locked up in our state prison system. 1955, Dr. King leads the Montgomery bus boycott. We have about 10,000 people locked up in the state of Ohio. 1963, I have a dream speech on the National Mall. We have 11,000 people locked up. 1968, when Dr. King is assassinated, we have 10,000 and change locked up in the state of Ohio. And that's our prison system. 1978, 10 years after Dr. King's assassination, we have 12,000 people locked up in the state of Ohio. Not a huge increase, 12,000 in 10 prisons. In 10 prisons. When I joined OJPC as its executive director in 2002, we had 35,000 people locked up in 33 prisons. Today, we have 50,000 people locked up in the state of Ohio. 50,000 people in 33 prisons. So that gives you a picture of some pretty dramatic increases over a relatively short period of time, in my opinion. All right. So what do you think has caused this tremendous growth in the prison system?
Drug enforcement.
Drug enforcement?
Yeah.
Mandatory sentencing.
Mandatory sentencing?
People making money off the system.
People making money off the
Yeah.
system. We'll come back to that in a second.
Guns.
What else? Did I hear something else?
Guns.
Guns? Who thinks since...
It's used as a mechanism of social control for people considered undesirable.
Yes.
A method of social control?
Racism, racial elements.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Yes, sir.
Lack of mental health and addiction services.
Lack of mental
Yes.
health and addiction services. Okay. You're all right. I mean, what researchers would tell you is that it's not that we're committing more crime now. In fact, crime rates have generally been falling. Now, you wouldn't know that when you watch the evening news, right? Because what leads off every local newscasts.
Blood.
Right? Blood. If it bleeds, it leads. And now that we've got these cable news networks that can run stories on a 24/7 basis, it makes us feel like we're a lot more in danger than we actually are. So if you ask a lot of folks on the street, they'll tell you, "Oh my goodness, crime is worse than it was, 5 years ago." Now, obviously, there are upticks in violence. We're seeing that in Cincinnati this past summer. We're seeing that in some major cities across the country. But when you look at the trends over time, crime rates are falling, yet incarceration rates are continuing to go up. And the bulk of the folks who are locked up across the country, and including in Ohio, are nonviolent folks who've committed drug offenses. That's the biggest increase, is that group of folks. And if you look back at if you look back at the war on drugs and when it started, the Rockefeller drug laws in the late 70s, the get tough on crime rhetoric that is always seems to be a current feature of our political discourse is how can we get tough on crime. And that's been going on now for 30 years. And that has led to us having the largest number of people behind bars in the world. In the world. And at what cost? At what cost? And you're absolutely right. Who said mental health issues were? That's another big problem because we've closed facilities for mentally ill folks. In Ohio, the #1 provider of inpatient mental health services is the state prison system. That's tragic. That's tragic. I commend to you, watch it if you can, there was a Frontline documentary that was done probably about 10 years ago now. And it is on the Ohio prison system and the treatment of mentally ill people in the system, because it's the #1 provider in our state of mental health services.
Was that before or after Reggie Wilson? Remember when Reggie?
Yeah, Reggie did.
He did a lot of programs, I think.
He did, but that was one of he's on that. He's on that front line. And one of the things he was complaining about is how they've had, he can't control who comes in. Judges, prosecutors and judges, prosecutors decide who's going to be prosecuted. Judges decide who's going to go off in prison, if they're convicted. And, what Reggie would tell you, Reggie Wilkinson used to be the director of the state prison system, and he has an international reputation for being very progressive on criminal justice issues. Really, we were lucky in the state to have that. And what Reggie would say is it's a shame that we have so many people locked up who have mental health issues, and they could be treated more humanely and more effectively and at a cheaper cost if they were in a community. That's what he would say, and that's what he said in the front piece. So I'm painting a pretty depressing picture, right? We leave the world, 2.4 million people locked up. Well, let's make it even more depressing in terms of talking about how this impacts people of color. In the state of Ohio, let's focus on Ohio. African Americans make up 12% of the population. 44% of the state prison population. If you look at national statistics, 1 in 3 African American men are going to spend some time in prison in their lifetime. What do you think the number is for white men?
1 in 17.
1 in 17. Okay. Somebody knows these. 1 in 17. All right. For black women, and let me just say this, because we often focus on the men and we neglect women. particularly women of color. And so I'm not going to make that mistake. The rate for African American women, 1 in 18 should expect to spend time in prison in their lifetime. For white women, do you want to take a guess? And you can't answer. You want to take a guess?
1 in 200.
1 in 200, 1 in 50. 1 in 111. So that's a pretty dramatic difference there. What do you think accounts for those differences?
Well, just as a basic thing, I mean, I think in terms of justice, the same thing applies in terms of, you see those things on hiring where someone has a, quote, white sounding name, Tom Brown, and then they same resume and they put in Jamal or whatever, and that person does not get called. So I think, for the job interview, I think the same thing, if you eliminated, it's sort of the same thing. I mean, just if you got someone who's in front of the justice system who's done one thing and they're a white person, you get a black person who's done the same thing, and it's just going to fall down harder. That's just the way it is right now.
Your dad's great, by the way. Give a shout out to Dr. Goshen. He helps us so profoundly at OJPC with our work. So I just want to give you a shout out. Dr. Goshen. Yes, sir.
I was going to say the new Jim Crow, the racism.
Yeah.
Okay, say a little bit more.
Well, and also I think to get people out of, disenfranchising people from voting too, because they can't vote because they're felons and whatever. But just it's part of the racist mindset to